I have seats up in the front here. So if there's anyone, I have 2 seats right up here. I'll help you all find seats. But if the staff, who needs entrees still? Can the staff watch? Raise your hand if you need entrees. Okay. I'll help anybody that's looking for a seat. I have a seat right here in the front. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker. Very excited. I'm also excited. One of my missions with this new company, FutureCon, that's been around for 7 years. Some of you may have known me from my past company, but one of my missions is really pushing women in cyber to be our speakers. And it's nice to see the room filled with women, not as many as, we wish, but it is growing. And we do appreciate all of our male practitioners, but again, I'm really always trying to push for women to speak. So if you're in the audience and you have any ambition to be a speaker, please reach out to me on LinkedIn because I would love to talk to you and help you with that path. But today I have Lina Dabit. She's the officer in charge of Cybercrime Investigations Team Toronto, RCMP, Federal Operations Central Region in Ontario. And sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied today. She joined the RCMP in 1994 and started her career in British Columbia, where she spent 13 years posted to detachment up and down eastern Vancouver Island. She was lucky for the opportunity to work a variety of duties from uniform patrol, drug section, major crime intelligence, border integrity, and running a police boat while working solo in the Gulf Islands. After transferring to Ontario in 2008, she focused on organized crime and national security as an investigative interviewing subject matter expert. She went on to establish the RCMP interview team in Ontario. She was commissioned to inspector in 2017 and became the commander of the Air Marshal Toronto Field Unit. In 2021, she was selected to lead the Cybercrime Investigative team in Ontario. She is currently working in an established innovative operational cyber hub focused on collaboration between federal, international, and private sector partnerships. Today, she's going to speak on people, policies, parameters, navigating the HR-Cybersecurity Nexus in the age of insider risk. Before I welcome her, I want to remind you, when we do have Q&A, when you raise your hand, please wait for my tech team, because this is a big room, and with the barriers, people can't hear, so we want to get your question on mic. And we have a couple hundred people that are joining us virtually. So my virtual audience out there, if you have any questions, please just put your question in the chat, and my tech team will make sure that your question is communicated to our speaker. With all that said, everyone, let's welcome Lina Dabit to the stage.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. So thank you all. Can you all hear me clearly? Okay. I'm just going to send out a little thing. Sometimes when I get really excited, I talk really fast. So if I do, just do a little slow down, Lina. We need to actually understand what you're saying. So don't hesitate to slow me down. So I'm Lina Dabit. Thank you, Kim, for that introduction. I've been a police officer for over 30 years, and I have been in cyber since 2021. For myself personally, I will say, having had some interactions with cyber, whether it was through Europol and supporting operations internationally on investigations, or dealing with insiders back in 2013, it was evident that this is the direction that policing needed to evolve to be able to investigate how crime was going to be functioning. So just to go back, so when I was talking about insider threats, this is an area for me that has a lot of interest, only because I see it as the one area that absolutely has to have a human in some way, shape, or form attached to the other end of it. And I'm very interested in the psychology of it. What makes people do what they do? Why are they an insider? What happened to make them this way? Were they planted there? And there's so many different avenues for insiders and how they have evolved and continue to evolve. So back in 2013, as I was saying, I was running the interview team, and I was asked to come in and do an interview for a gentleman who used to work for one of the shipyards in Canada that builds the Canadian naval vessels. So as you can imagine, everything in there is very protected, it's very secured, it's very classified, and this individual was found to have been selling state secrets to a foreign country. And it was all about and so again, when you look at that from a national security perspective, that's pretty intense. And so I did the interview and, really just talking to the gentleman about it. And it was evident that being an insider was not his intention. It would never have been something that he would have thought that he would have done. And as it turned out, there's always a reason, good or bad, malicious or not malicious. And for this particular gentleman, it was his desire, at that point he was a single dad, to put his son through university in the US, which is very expensive, knowing that he couldn't provide for his son on his salary and with trying to basically give his son a leg up. He was contacted by someone, or he had contacted someone in a foreign state, like a foreign state actor, and basically became the catalyst to selling those secrets. So again, when you look at, this is someone who absolutely had no intention, and yet here he is. So we're going to cover it off. We're going to talk about different things. So we're going to talk about first what the current landscape is. Insider threat is something that is, other than AI, to be honest, is at the top of everybody's mindset. What are insider threats? What do we need to know about them? And it's a growing concern globally. It's always been there. So let's be clear. Insider threats didn't just evolve in our cyberspace. The risk of insider threats have been around for a very long time and long before we live in the digital age. And so I do find it interesting that when you look at the first stat, that 56% of them, that means the majority of them are done accidentally or not on purpose or not with the intention to be malicious. But that's a huge number of people or your assets, resources that are creating risks for you and your company. These attacks have increased 47%. So that is a huge increase, and we are seeing this rise year over year. And when you're looking at things where these insiders have the ability to impact your company, it's not just your loss of intellectual property. It's not just, operations get shut down. It is not that your information is being sold to the highest bidder and now someone has an advantage over you. It's not something that's done maliciously automatically. And so when you look at how it's affecting, why are these numbers increasing and how are they increasing? So the average annual cost at $15.4 million, and that was in 2022. So it just goes to show you how insidious insider risks are and how they can they almost become a longer term. Like it was a great presentation, I think just shortly before lunch about it was the first one this morning, about the 10 days, the dwell time. But insiders can be in your system or in your companies for years and years. And all you have to look at is Boeing. That was decades where they had an insider filtering out sensitive information before he was caught. So what are the types of insiders? And I know for a lot of people, your first thought for most of us is someone who's malicious or angry or not disgruntled. I didn't get the the promotion that I wanted. But there are other types of insiders that we need to consider. So these are the types of them, and we're going to break them down each one so that you understand the why. 90% of the time, and being an operational police officer, dealing with criminals right across the board in all aspects of criminality. What drives someone to do something? What is the reason behind it? Is it financial gain? Is it revenge? Was it an accident? And so when you look at it from that context, there's a lot we can understand from that. So we're going to start with malicious. This is the one that everyone thinks about when you first think of insider. At least I do. And there used to be, there's a saying that says there's no what is it about the women scorned? There's no revenge or nothing as angry as a woman scorned. The reality is it isn't just women. Anyone who feels that they have been put out has the potential to be a malicious insider. So think about instances where someone feels that maybe they were the best candidate for a job and they got passed over, or someone feels that their boss is a jerk and is taking credit for all their work. I mean, we all know those bosses, right? Who's taking credit for their work and you want to get back at them, or someone who feels that the company is profiting off them. There's so many different ways that people feel disillusioned with work. While most of us would say, okay, I no longer feel like I'm valued here, I'll go elsewhere. Other people have that sense of, well, I'm going to get what I deserve out of this. The one thing to keep in mind about malicious insiders is that it is done on purpose. It is not accidental. And when I say on purpose, they may not be saying, well, I want to undermine the company, and their position may be, I'm doing this to financially better myself. I'm living a life that is more extravagant. I want to live like a influencer, whatever it is. Whatever action they are taking, they are doing it on purpose. And that is the sort of crux of why the malicious insiders act the way they do. So when you think about why they do it, so you have financial gain, you also have intellectual property. This is a really big issue for many companies, is when you're looking at, are your employees being approached by your competitors? Are they going to take away, some of your intellectual property, turn it over to your competitors, give someone else an advantage? How much does that cost you at the end when someone else comes out with a product that you were developing? And when you look at the financial gain, in some instances, it's significant. In some cases, some of the people that are actually filtering this information and taking it from your company are making a pittance compared to what they can make selling off your property. I will also say we are seeing instances where people are planted on purpose. So it's someone who is an insider, but they aren't approached by a company, they aren't approached by a competitor, they aren't doing it for financial gain. Their sole reason for coming into your company and your organization is to be able to gain access and then be able to take information as they please. Okay, unintentional. I did put Homer Simpson in there, so my kids love the Simpsons, as my kid calls it, the Simpsons. I can't think of a better unintentional insider than Homer Simpson. If you are familiar with it, he is a bumbling buffoon. He is just like a bull in a china shop. And it really does underline the fact that unintentional insiders are that. They are sometimes, and when you look at how that's caused, so you've got things like negligence. Are people not paying attention to, what they're doing, what they're saying, things they're plugging into, accidentally sharing sensitive information? These are all parts of what an unintentional insider does. A big one that's prevalent right now is falling for phishing. And there's people that, don't want to admit it. And I will say, again, like I'm technically upper management. Your cybersecurity awareness and training cannot be pushed downwards at people. Oftentimes, your bigger risk are upwards, so you need to push that training upwards. I had a call from an external, like a third-party security provider, who by the third time that he called me, he was nearly in tears because the CEO of one of the companies that they provided IT services for had been successfully phished for the third time. And this was a company that it doesn't matter how many times you are giving, your employees have to have all this security training. Well, who's giving the training and ensuring that your executives are accountable for their training and their security awareness? And so you look at that risk, and it is continuous risk. Personally, if I was him, I would have been like, okay, you know what, the contract's done. I can't work with you people, because again, this is someone who is the CEO of the company who felt that everyone else needed to focus on cybersecurity, but the rules didn't apply. The other thing, simple things, misconfiguring a system, improperly installing something. And when we talk about, I will say, letting classified or information go out inadvertently, those are all risks. And like I will say, in my organization recently, we just had a massive upgrade to our systems. And what's great now is any attachment you send out, which I was like, wow, who the heck thought of this? And it came out of Ottawa, which was really shocking. But all that to say, when you look at the fact that they've actually added, you know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you? So what they did was they actually added a caveat. So before you can save a document, so I was working on this PowerPoint, and it automatically came up with a protected A, and I was like, my document's unclassified. I know this because everything's open source that I can share in venues like this. But I love that it actually has a definition now of protected A means this, protected B means this. You can transmit this. And what's so great is it's right there. There is no one having, it is actually right there in front of you. So kudos to that. I'm actually going to send a note to them next week to say, this is exactly the type of awareness that people need to think about. The other side of that is when you look at unintentional insiders, and I have inadvertent policy violations up there because let's face it, there's a lot of policy and there's a lot of SOPs and everything that are written that are sometimes not clear to read. Are they policies for the sake of policies? Are they things that you have to follow for the sake of having to follow? Do people not understand what it actually means and why they're doing it? I know this is a big thing in any federal government or any, pretty much any government is the bureaucracy. Does what you're asking people to do and adhere to make sense? If it doesn't, then you need to change it because I can guarantee you, people are going to find workarounds. And so where you have your unintentional insiders there is you, let's say, onboard a new employee and they go in and they're talking to one of your employees and the new employee almost always will say, oh, okay, but I thought we weren't allowed to send it like this, or I thought I wasn't allowed to plug this in. And sometimes, and it's happened, where the response is, oh yeah, no, it's fine, just go ahead, no one, it's not a big deal, you're in the office, it's safe. Or not a big deal, that's just, the policy's there, but we all do it this way. And so what you have now is a culture where people are, unintentionally creating significant risk for your organizations. So we're going to talk more about remotely as a separate, but that is a really big thing, and especially post-COVID, that's become a really big issue. So we're going to talk about third-party insiders. So third-party risk, as you all know, is a really significant risk in cybersecurity right across the board, and not just from insiders in that context. I know that I was speaking to some in industry who were saying that, especially during COVID and since then, that in some instances, only 10% of third-party of your third parties are vetted, which is a really high risk. And then how do you decide which ones are getting vetted and which ones are not? Because that's a really big vulnerability for a lot of companies. And so where are the risks? Do they have access that they really don't need? Do they need to have access that do they need to have the access that you've given them in order to do their jobs? The likelihood is not. And funny enough, last week there was a really good report, and I always want to call it the Pokemon Sullivan report, but it's not. It's the Ponyman, I call it Ponyman because it sounds like Pokemon report. And there was a really good article, so I would really recommend reading that. It's an excellent article, and it was talking about uncovering the risks of privileged access by insiders and third parties. And the stats in there are alarming, and they should be something that everyone takes to heart. That 47% of organizations that had breaches and had their threats come in, 47% of them were from third party, and 34% of third party users and 45% of internal users had more access than they needed to do their jobs. So again, why are you giving people access if they don't actually need it to do their jobs? So those are the kind of things when you look at where your risks are, and when you look at and you add things like your regulatory and your legal liabilities, if it's a third party that's working for you, there's a very good chance you are going to be liable. So how do you mitigate that? How do you focus on that part of it? The third one that I'm going to talk about is one that's coming up, I will say, more and more frequently, and you have compromised insiders. So really, I want you to think about compromised insiders almost as a subset of the malicious insider part. Now, they're part of the malicious insider, but they themselves are not the malicious insider. In fact, they probably want to be doing anything but being an insider. But they are now between a rock and a hard place. And we are seeing this increasingly happen more frequently. And it's funny because we just had a chat this morning with a colleague we ran into about kidnapping insurance, ransom insurance. And a good chunk of those cases are not for kidnapping in Canada. I mean, although it has happened and it's been happening a little more frequently, it's not happening in the sense of someone's going to get taken off the street in Toronto and kidnapped, and now that's why you have this insurance or why you are looking at kidnapping and ransomware. The likelihood is they are being blackmailed and extorted. And so how would we address that level of risk? What are we doing to help protect our people to keep this from happening so that we ourselves don't get compromised? And so you look at things like threats of doxing, releasing your personal information. And when you look at how AI is used for the power of bad, and that's so prevalent right now, it's so easy to scan all your social media. And, everyone worries about, what's in their LinkedIn. This is my LinkedIn. It's very professional. It's very, I don't have any of my personal stuff in there. But I'm a mom of a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old, and I am constantly on them about, cybersecurity for me at work starts in my home. And so what are my kids' presence? What are they doing? Where are they at? What are they doing? Who are they hanging out with? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't take much, and I don't use my married name. Dabit is my maiden name. And so I have like the Superman persona, except I don't come out of a phone booth. But all that to say is I keep my personal life and my private life very separate. But it doesn't mean that someone who isn't driven enough or motivated enough is not going to find out what that means. So what that does is it increases the risk, not just to myself as an example, but to anyone that I come in contact with. Because if you don't think that your C-suite, your boards, your executives all don't have, somebody isn't doing profiles on them and doesn't have everything they need to know about them, then you're mistaken. It's exactly what, and now I'm having a menopause moment. I can't remember his name this morning who was speaking about, having all your information, but it's exactly that. It doesn't take them any time at all to put that together, to develop these files on people, because the more recon you do, the better it is. And so you're also having instances where people are, threats of virtual kidnapping. There was one instance, not in Canada, thankfully, but and these are going to increase. I hate to say it, but they are, where a woman who did have high-value credentials at work received a call from her daughter that she had been kidnapped. And again, it's not ironic because the daughter was on a field trip with school. So it just goes to show you the level of reconnaissance that had been done. The daughter was on an overnight school trip, and the woman got a call saying, "Mommy, I've been kidnapped. I'm taken. We've got your daughter, blah, blah, blah. And, we need access to whatever." And she literally was in a full-on panic. How do I get my kid back? What do I need to give up to get my kid back? And thankfully, her spouse was there, and his first instinct was, well, hold on a second, let's just call her. And they call her, and she's like, what, Dad? Like, why are you bugging me? I'm on a school trip. Leave me alone. As anyone who has children who've been through 13 years knows exactly that's the response you're going to get. And so that was her response, and she realized she had been targeted and victimized. So this is very strategic. And everyone thinks of phishing emails as these big mass emails that are very general, and it's great if most people don't click, and they're personalized, but they come out in masses. And what we're seeing is a shift of very strategic targeting of people who hold high value credentials. So instead of targeting 500 people in the company that only have access to some things, we'll tell you what, we'll spend a little more time and a little more effort, and we will focus on the board, or we will focus on the C-suite. So those are the kind of things that are becoming more and more prevalent. The other thing to keep in mind is honeypot. Everybody loves a good honeypot. So you fall for a honeypot, you end up in a compromising position. You know, it's your credibility, your family, so much at risk. What would you do to protect that, to protect your reputation or your family or everything else? So they are not, I just wish these people would come up with ideas that are for the power of humankind instead of things like this, because we'd be in a lot better place, I can tell you that. And so when you look at how that all plays together, these are all going to increase your risks. So when we look at our current challenges, intellectual property is a huge one right now. So when you look at sensitive designs, trade secrets, your proprietary processes, the financial losses and the competitive disadvantage are counted in the billions of dollars. And so there is a huge impetus there to be able to either place insiders, and it's sometimes this isn't like an insider that's going to start a job on day 1 and by day 10 they're trying to get into your systems. There are a lot of foreign state actors that are planted with a long game in mind. They are not going to suddenly out themselves and do something that's going to draw attention. They are going in there, and in some instances they are waiting years before they do anything. And so there's that level of trust and that credibility and everything else that comes along with it. The impacts on operational disruptions, the data breaches, everything in your systems is at risk, but all of this is becoming exfiltrated. When you look at the data side, data is a commodity. Everyone knows that, you know, the value sometimes is not in ransomware anymore. We are seeing a shift. I'm not saying ransomware is going anywhere, but we are seeing that ransomware is coming down slightly, but the exfiltration and sale of data is becoming a lot more commonplace. So the data itself becomes the target. If they manage to get some ransomware out of it, great, but we are seeing, you know, again, if you are going to go in there and try to encrypt everything, you're going to set off flags, alarms, everything else. But if you go in there as an insider and you're slowly sucking information out, it's a lot more lucrative for you in the end. The increased sophistication, we all know that. What used to take a threat actor, 8-9 hours of work to build a profile from a social engineering perspective can now do the same thing in 2 to 3 minutes. And it's exactly it. All the things that we used to look for to say, okay, does this seem legit? Does this not seem legit? They're fixing that up. So each time we identify something and put it out and be like, okay, this is how you can tell this. And then they turn around and they're ahead of us. They have an endless supply of funds and resources to be able to do it. And again, it's a very lucrative business. Cybercrime in general is the 3rd largest economy in the world. And cybercrime in general is only behind the US and China as an economy. So there is huge interest in being able to keep the machine going. So these are pretty straightforward. These are things we need to cover, but I put them in there because this is going to talk about the HR side. How does HR play a role in it? And so when you look at some of these, the indicators, some of this stuff, your HR department, if you involve them, if you don't silo, will be able to help you with some of this. The common denominator in all these is that it's human. There is a human behind each of these things, each of these indicators. So why HR? Again, I like memes, not gonna lie. It's like my juvenile tendencies come out. So we need to look at HR as beyond just hiring and onboarding. HR can lead by example. HR can help you build a culture that is founded in cybersecurity. So they can help you do this, but some of the things that need to be covered, are they embedding cybersecurity in your workplace when they onboard people? Are people told this is the things that we're doing? This is how we continue training. And when I say training, and when we get to the policy piece, I'll talk about it. You want to anger me, or wave a red flag, a red cape in front of me, tell me that it's a policy and that it's a checkbox. I don't do checkboxes. If you have a policy that is a checkbox or an SOP, or when you're onboarding someone and it doesn't make sense, but it's a checkbox, and we've always had that, and it covers our liability, so we're just all going to check all these boxes, then to be honest, it's not worth the paper it's printed on, because that is not a genuine policy, and if you can't even articulate why you have some of these things, then what's the point of having them? Okay, rant over. So policy compliance, and when I talk about policy compliance, this is what HR, you have to hold everybody accountable. And this goes back to it goes upwards just as much as it goes downwards. And this is where you can really involve your HR programs to be able to do that. Secure hiring practices, again, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but you look at some of the impacts that we've had through COVID and the remote worker issues. Are people vetting people the way that they should be vetted? Even not remote workers are, again, how many, again, I'm not ragging on HR. My sister's a CHRO at a big company. So, but these are talks we have all the time. Is, does your company do vetting? Like, do you actually check references? Do you actually go through and verify what someone has told you? Because how many times do we see on the news someone who's in a really prestigious position gets discovered 2, 3, 4 years later that they falsified some of their education or they falsified some of this? Why are we waiting till people have access to some of these systems and are on the job for 3 to 4 years before we actually address some of these things and are checking them? So why policies matter? And again, are they genuine or are they a checkbox? And when you have policies, it does give people a framework. I'm a huge framework person. I like knowing what my rules are or what my parameters are. I don't always follow them, but what my rules are for staying in a box or how to keep things safe. However, what a policy will allow you to do is set those parameters and set those boxes or those guidelines for people to be able to follow them. And even things like access control, being able to have your HR work with your cybersecurity to establish some of these policies will ensure that you have policies that actually make sense. Consistent enforcement. I don't know about you, but as a teen growing up, I don't know about your house, but my house was like, do what I say, not what I do. Okay, Dad, that's going to go over really well. And I try not to do that with my kids, but I also don't do that with my teams. I hold my teams to the same accountability that I hold myself. And in fact, I probably hold myself to a higher standard of things, because if I can't demonstrate it by leading by example, then you shouldn't be having rules and policies if you expect your people to do them and you aren't doing them yourself. What some of these things do with the policy is it does help you figure out where your anomalies are, where people are where they're not supposed to be, where are the flags that are coming up. Without understanding that someone is or isn't allowed to do something, you will not be able to tell if something is a flag or hasn't been adhered to. It also helps you govern your third-party access, and that's, again, a really big risk we need to consider. So now we're going to talk about remote worker threats. So during the pandemic, and I know this because I've talked to a number of very large companies, including critical infrastructure, where we talked about, during COVID, they didn't have the opportunity to vet new employees as effectively as they used to do before they had as many remote employees. So what was happening was a lot of people got hired. Like I said, I've talked to a number of companies where they were in the process of, getting people out because they weren't who they said they were. So what this comes down to, there was when you look at, there's a big, I don't say a big push, but there has been an instance where you have thousands of workers from North Korea who have applied for jobs in Canada and the US and elsewhere using false identities. So what they are doing is taking an identity, building a fake identity completely, and then going into workplaces as legitimate IT, infrastructure support. They are highly skilled at what they do in the sense that they can actually do the job, and in many instances, they're doing the job effectively. Why this is important is by having thousands of remote workers who do this and are then able to get a salary for it, so it's a double win. They're getting a salary for it. The salaries are then funneled back to North Korea to help fund their own government or their own policies or their own initiatives. It helps them evade sanctions, and it helps to generate revenue. This has been a very big thing. There was an article in one of the papers a few months back where the FBI actually discovered a bunch of remote workers that were actually in North Korea, like physically located in North Korea. It wasn't that they were here. They were physically in North Korea, but because they, worked odd hours because they worked hours to match where they were supposed to be physically located, they were much harder to detect. They also used things like through VPNs, proxy servers, remote desktop tools to basically hide where they were. And so it was a lot harder to detect that they were in the systems. They also, unfortunately, what that also opens you up for, especially in an IT capacity, is the ability to bring malware into your systems. And so because of this, there's been a number of companies have now put in processes and SOPs, which they should, to deal with remote workers. Are you going back to, okay, you can be a remote worker, but for some of the interviews you have to come in person? Is that to me, that's not a very big investment, is to fly someone. You know, if you're a company in the US or wherever, fly that person in to meet with your team. And if you hire them and then they work remotely, okay, no problem. But they have physically come in and you have physically met them and you have vetted them. Because this is a huge risk, and to be honest, it's an unnecessary risk for the investment of actually meeting people, face to face. So how do you mitigate this? So I always go back to this: rescind access for employees who are no longer at the company. This happens a lot more frequently than you think, or maybe you do know. There's a lot of times where people are no longer at a company, but no one has, their offboarding isn't as effective or hasn't been used as effectively as their onboarding, in which case their access isn't there. They still can, they can still, in some cases, come into the building. I know for me, when I leave, they're going to cut me off of everything, and I'm not even going to be able to come to the building without an escort. But that's how it should be, because if you're no longer an employee, you should not be able to have access to get into systems. And I always bring the CN Rail employee, and he was a CN Rail employee in Minnesota, and that is what he did. He was going to get fired because he was really not a very poor employee. And instead of getting fired, they decide that he convinces them that they should just let him resign. So they did. They let him resign, no problem. Except that they didn't take away his laptop or his controls or his access or anything. And sure enough, he went home, and right before he left and turned everything in, he went into their system. He encrypted and locked up everything for CN Rail. And then, just to make absolute sure, he smashed his laptop and all his devices so no one else could get in there. And this is a pretty significant thing and they were unable to fix it. So again, why was he still given access? But this isn't a case that's unique to CN Rail. This happens frequently. There was one very large company, and I'm not going to name them, but they had, on paper, it still looked like when they were going through, and it was post-breach that it was discovered. So post-breach, they had to go back and redo everyone's passwords and access. And on paper, the company looked like it had 38,000 employees, and yet the reality was they only had 24. And so a lot of people were either temporary and they just hadn't removed their accesses and they still had the passes. And again, how robust is your offboarding? And this is where, again, that nexus between your HR. What does that look like? Are you doing interviews for your offboarding? Are you meeting with people to understand what they're doing? Do you have, and I know there's a number of vendors that I've spoken with who are like, I have tools for this. Great, but that's is not the whole solution. Your tools and your technology is not the only thing. You still have to have the human part of it. And that means things like interviewing. Do you know what questions to ask? How do you understand why someone is leaving? Is there anything they need? Some of it, even if they don't want to share with you, at least the willingness to be able to talk to someone may help understand whether someone is a risk or not. And that's why this is such an important part of it. The other part, and this is sort of the big part, if you think of it as nothing else, is a culture that encourages people to report things that are out of the ordinary, things that are not the norm, things that they may not be able to put a finger on, but something's wrong. As a police officer, and like I said, working in the field for so many years, I trust my instincts implicitly, and that's my caveman brain. If anyone knows me, that's how I always describe it. It's my caveman brain, and it is literally my subconscious picking up on something that is not right, but my conscious brain hasn't figured out what it is yet. But trust your instinct. So what you want is a a culture within your organizations that supports and empowers people to come to you and say, hey, this might be, I don't know, I can't put a finger on it, but something's not right here. And instead of making people feel stupid, and I've talked to staff who've said, I felt like an idiot, I shouldn't have said anything because they wanted like proof right then and there. Instead of that, having a culture where people feel like they can come to you or whoever within your company to say, something isn't right, can we just take a look at it? Can we just do a deep dive? I can't articulate it, but something doesn't feel right. And so when you have a culture that encourages people to be a part of the solution, you will actually have less problems. Because statistically speaking, in organizations where people are penalized and it's punitive, like if you get, your phishing emails or your pen testing and everything's going and you fall for a phishing email and it's punitive, the likelihood that it will get reported actually decreases. So now what happens is instead of someone then getting successfully phished and it getting caught where you could kind of mitigate it to a certain degree, it's now exploded to something this big because no one wants to tell someone in management because their worry is that they're going to lose their job or they're going to get penalized or anything like that. So if you have a culture where reporting and awareness and people feel like they're part of the solution is one of your most effective ways. Some of the other ones, I do have clear incident response plans. We do tabletop exercises. We've done them with a number of critical infrastructure. And one of the things we realize is sometimes people don't actually know what to do. So your IT department or when there is something that's an anomaly, they know what to do. But your regular employee who maybe isn't part of that world may not have a clue what they're supposed to do or who they're supposed to report to. And this happens a lot. I will give a shout out to, I don't think he's here today, but Emerson at Guelph Wellington Public Health, he's the CISO there. And I love it. And he's created this whole code black thing, of what to do so that, your nurses and your doctors and your staff on the floors, this is exactly what you do. When a code black comes in, you go in, you unplug these things, and then off you go. Like he's got it all down to a system. But it's great because now people who are not in that space aren't being pulled in 30 different directions to say, hold on, you need to go help these people. Now you need to go help these people. Now you need to go help theirs. Everybody knows, frontline, this is what I'm going to do. And so it's just things that allow people to be, again, part of the solution. I will finish it off with, again, I'm going to underline the training has to start at the top. I know I've said it, and I'm going to say it again. This is a very big problem, and really those with those high-value credentials and at the C-suite are more likely to be targeted than someone, at the sort of, middle or lower ends of the company. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. So I am going to say I always put this cybersecurity as a team game. But if you notice, I did not put my phone number or my email like I usually do if you've ever heard me speak. So that is my retirement photo. Today is the last presentation I will give as the lead or the officer in charge of the Toronto Cybercrime team. I will say I am not leaving cyberspace or cybersecurity. I'm very passionate about this space, and I just feel like it's after 30 years of policing. I got to do a resume for the first time since 1993, so that was fun. But needless to say, I'll be moving on, but I will be staying in the space. So you will still see me, just not in this iteration. So I want to thank you for listening to me. I will take questions if you have any, but I just wanted to say thank you for listening to me and for being part of my journey. Thank you. No questions?
How do you feel? Sorry, this is much louder than I expected. So you mentioned that in-person vetting, when you're doing interviews, you feel like seeing somebody in person will help you get a better sense of whether they could be a threat or not versus doing online interviews. And I was just wondering, how do you feel you could tell by seeing somebody in person that they would be a potential threat?
So there's two parts to that. So number one, the reason you want to meet with them in person is you would eliminate, and I can guarantee you, if North Korea is doing it as a way to evade sanctions and generate revenue and be able to get into, and when I say these remote workers, some of them have been taken out of critical infrastructure environments. So it's a pretty significant breach for them to have even been in there. So what that does is if you meet someone in person, you know that they aren't coming from North Korea for this interview and they aren't coming from anywhere else and any other foreign state actors, like foreign state sponsored. They're not as state sponsored. When it comes to meeting someone in person, you are meeting them. And so again, my happy place is interviewing. You can pick up on a lot of cues, and there's a lot of things that you can understand in the interviews and you're able to ask questions about. The meeting them in person is part of it. You also need to do, obviously, a very robust vetting of who they are and check their references before you get to that point. But I mean, I know for us in the way we do it for our interviews, all of our things are done in person because you need to know who that person is in front of you. The reason I'm not a fan of video interviews, truthfully, and this is, maybe it's just Lina being super paranoid, but I'm telling you the last few years, I've gotten to the point where, and this is exactly that point, I came back from the Europol conference a couple of years ago from, I was at The Hague, and I saw a video interview being done in real time, and it was actually terrifying. Because I'm pretty good at picking them out. I couldn't tell. And it was the mannerisms of the person I thought it was everything, but it wasn't that person. And so, you know, before we used to be able to trust what our eyes saw. I don't trust what my eyes see. I no longer trust what my ears see. I no longer trust calls that come from my bank. Like, I trust nobody. It's an awful place to be, but if you do it in person, you're eliminating that completely. Because now, whatever fake ID they have built, whatever fake whatever they have developed, they actually have to be that person. So they are going to come in, and you are going to have, you know, if you are going to do an ID check or anything that shows that they have to prove who they are. So the likelihood of their being able to use a fake name, a false picture, is much more. It's mitigated to a much better degree than you would during a video interview or anything else like that. If that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't completely erase it, don't get me wrong, but it will eliminate a huge number of state-sponsored actors because, again, for them to be effective state actors, they're general, and in some of the places where they're operating from, they don't get to leave that country. So you've now eliminated that whole piece of it. Are people still going to lie because they think that's what you want to hear? 100%. But it will definitely lower the number of or lower the risk for sure.
Thank you.
No problem. No, I think we're good.
Do we have any other questions?
Oh.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
This isn't directly related to your presentation, but I was wondering about what you see coming down the pipe regarding regulatory compliance and regulatory pressure in the cyberspace on different industries or businesses in general from various levels of government.
So that's a great question. We saw a lot of advances, and I mean, I know people were very, one side, very polarized with regards to what they felt about some of the regulations that were coming in. Some of the business sectors, especially like the Business Council of Canada, was pushing for a number of initiatives and a number of new laws. And again, this is Lina Dabit talking, not Lina Dabit, RCMP, because these views are my own. We need to have some rules and regulations in place. But the problem is, obviously, with Parliament getting prorogued, a number of them sort of died on the table. I do anticipate that we will see, I would say, a reemergence. Some of them will be risen from the ashes and will be implemented in some way, shape, or form. But I will say, especially looking at the federal government cybersecurity strategy that they released about, I say like 4 months ago, they released a new one. You can see the emphasis in certain areas of cybersecurity. Regulation is going to be one of them. I have no doubt that it will be. They appointed a fentanyl czar and a border czar. I'd love to see a cyber czar. I know there's a few people pushing for that, and I think they have the right the right drive behind them to see that happen. So I am hopeful that we will see some regulations. I just don't know what it'll look like. And honestly, I think it will also depend on the global impacts, let's just say, of how cybersecurity is viewed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one question about cybercrime. Is for most of the ordinary crimes, the police works towards arrest and prosecution, but most of the cybercrime happen at the mastermind overboard. So
Yes.
how do we manage this? Because even if we can catch the malicious insider, their mastermind are likelihood in another country. Then
Right.
how do we manage this and prevent future attack? Thank you.
No, and that's a great question. I will say what's really neat here. So, I mean, I do want to give a shout out to my team. They've done a phenomenal job. So my team did the NetWalker affiliate a few years back that got arrested, convicted here, and then extradited to the US, where he got like 20 years in jail after pleading guilty. But what you will see is for policing in general to recognize that success, and I use air quotes, doesn't always mean conviction and arrest and prosecution. Sometimes success is disruption. So we were part of the operation last week along with a number of our provincial and municipal partners to take down some of the lab host entities or users. So what you will see is oftentimes when they put up on and I forget the name of it, I want to say like a release, but when they do seize the domain, or they go on the site and they seize it, and it's now under, and it oftentimes, almost always, those type of investigations are international. So when you look at what my team does, we focus on the international investigations. So we work very closely with the NCA in the UK, JCAT in the Netherlands, FBI, US Secret Service. So by doing that, we actually have a much more robust approach to doing it. Now, we don't do Canada technically, especially in policing, we don't do offensive. Like, I can't go in there and hack into someone's, in a foreign state. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes cyber criminals are in countries, oftentimes, are in countries that we can't even prosecute and, bring to justice. We can't even extradite them. And so what happens there is we work with foreign law enforcement, we work with other entities, and in some instances, it's disrupting. Disrupting them is seen as the victory. It may not end up in prosecution. And then lastly, when you look at the work that we do with our private sector partners, sometimes that's a really big part of it, is when we're working with the telecos and the critical infrastructure and the banks, how do we help protect everybody all around? That's a win. Thank you.
We have an online question. This is from Dave Uli. There's a new strategy from foreign enemies to plant people in American companies for espionage. How can HR departments ensure that applicants from other countries applying for WFH positions are properly vetted?
So this again goes back to, if you are going to bring someone in or thinking of bringing someone in, do you actually know that that person is where they say they are? So if they're saying, I'm Dave from San Francisco, is Dave really in San Francisco? And even if you don't want to fly the candidate out, there is nothing wrong, and I used to do it all the time. So when you look at like officer boards, so to become an inspector in the RCMP, you have to sit on a board, it's like 3 hours. And so what would happen is a board has to be comprised of already commissioned officers. And so I've done it where I will go and I will meet up with other colleagues, and you never interview in the same place that you're from. And so I travel to Halifax, to Edmonton, to wherever, and we meet. See, I talk with my hands a lot. We meet, and then we actually do like 6 sets of interviews over the course of 3 days, and that's all we do. We literally fly out our, I guess, like a mini HR team, and we go out and we interview the candidates here. And so if you want to look at it, rather than sending someone a plane ticket to come to you, think about like a roving HR where you put them in, where you have your HR team travel around to different sites and say, okay, well, Dave, you're saying you're from San Fran. We're going to set up interviews in San Fran. And then you just set them all up for that geographic area. And then what you're doing is you're actually, number one, you're committed to ensuring that the people that you're bringing into your company are who they say they are and are located where they are. And for me, the vetting is huge. Some of those individuals who were actually overseas, even though they worked in US companies and Canadian companies, and said that they were, Joe Schmo, I work from here, but he wasn't. He was actually someone from North Korea. What ended up happening was once it got figured out, no one had vetted them. Everyone's like, well, it was COVID, it was really busy. We didn't have the resources. Well, I don't care. Like, that's a risk. Like, that's a risk you could have avoided. So, we good?
We have another one from Ishan Jani.
Okay.
Are there any good resources available for the Insider Threat Incident Response Playbook/guides?
Ooh, that's a great question. I was at an event a few weeks back, and they were talking about there is one offered, I think, by University of Carleton. I don't know if it is or isn't. I haven't researched it. It isn't as much that I know of. I know they're out there, but they're few and far between. But I will say this ability to put together your HR and your insider threat has been probably one of the more best practices SOPs scenario. But I can't vouch for any because I don't know them.
We have time for one more. Are there any other questions?
There's a couple there.
Okay, over here. These pillars are hard to find, you guys. Where was the question?
Hi, my name is Fazal Mumtaz from Goeasy financial company. We have seen a lot of the increase in number of offshore hiring, especially within the domain of cybersecurity. So are there any kind of regulation that limits that kind of hiring because it increases the risk of insider threat?
Ooh.
And also it's hard to, put controls around those, right?
Right. No, that's a great question. I don't know of any regulations per se. There may be. That isn't my sort of area of expertise. I will say for certain roles, as we all know, there's call centers that are outsourced to other countries because it's a lot more economic, I guess, for companies to do that. But from the IT perspective, I don't know of any regulations specifically, but I don't know very many people that outsource to that level. You're giving someone access, and like I was mentioning earlier, statistically, there's a big number of third parties that are involved in your company or that are in your company but not in your company that have accesses that they shouldn't have. So I'm not sure of any regs, but that's a great question. So now I'm going to have to go back and research it. Okay, thank you.
Do we have anyone else?
No, I think we're good.
If you're out there, I can't see you because of these pillars. Okay, I think that's it then.
Thank you.
Let's again give Lina another round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks, Kim.
We're sorry to see you leave the
Oh, thank
position
you.
you're leaving, but
That's okay.
we're happy to know that you're staying as a cybersecurity practitioner.
Thank
Lena's going to be around all afternoon. She's going to be joining our panel that's going to happen at 4 o'clock. There may be a lot of times when we have our keynote speaker, there's a long line of people asking her questions, but maybe we could give her some grace so she could eat her lunch. So she'll be around.